Well, thank you for having me here this evening. It's always a special pleasure to come to Berkeley, if for no other reason, the weather. I was looking forward today to taking advantage of the weather, but regrettably other things detained me. And it's also the last evening of my tour together with Loki and Jody. They're returning to the UK early tomorrow morning. I'll be speaking in a few more places, and it's been a real special pleasure being with them, mostly because they represent, in my eyes, apart from being very decent young men, they represent, in my eyes, the prospect that we now have a real chance, a real opportunity to reach out to public opinion, to reach out deep into the mainstream, and to mobilize that public opinion, or as Jody likes to put it, to harness that public opinion, turn it into a political force, and finally, to put an end to the conflict. Now, one of the reasons new opportunities have opened up for reaching into the broad public, one of the reasons is what happened in Gaza in 2008, 2009. To some extent, it's a kind of peculiarity. Why are we talking even about Gaza a year and a half later? As everybody in this room knows, wars come and go with great frequency in that part of the world. Death and destruction occur with great regularity in that part of the world. And so why, nearly a year and a half later, are people still talking about Gaza? It's a kind of curiosity. It's the ghost that Israel, try as it does to bury, it can't succeed. It's the shadow that Israel, try as it does to evade. It's unsuccessful. So one of the questions we might want to ponder this evening is, why won't Gaza go away? Before looking at those 22 days from December 17th to December 27th to January 18th, those 22 days that Amnesty International called the 22 days of death and destruction. Before looking at those days, I want to briefly recall what led up to the Israeli assault. It's always arbitrary where you begin a story. I'll start in January 2006, when there were elections held in the occupied Palestinian territories. And surprisingly, unpredictably, Hamas, the Islamic movement, won the elections. Former President Jimmy Carter, one of the international observers, he said the elections were completely honest and fair. Israel and the United States reacted to those completely honest and fair elections by imposing an economic blockade on Gaza. In June 2007, the United States, Israel, and some elements among the Palestinian Authority, they attempted a coup against the legally elected government. In the United States, that's called democracy promotion. Hamas wasn't too keen on this latest American exercise in democracy promotion. It sent the Palestinian elements packing to the West Bank, and it took full control over Gaza. Israel and the United States reacted by escalating, tightening the blockade of Gaza, a blockade which Amnesty International now called a flagrant violation of international law, a blockade which the Goldstone mission, to which I'll return, the Goldstone mission later said that it was a possible crime against humanity. During these months, the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson, she journeyed to Gaza, and she said, and now I'm quoting her, "Gaza's whole civilization has been destroyed." I'm not exaggerating. Its whole civilization has been destroyed. In June 2008, Hamas and Israel entered into a ceasefire brokered by Egypt, and each side had obligations to meet under the ceasefire. Hamas had to stop its rocket and mortar attacks on Israel, and Israel had to gradually lift the blockade of Gaza, the blockade which was a flagrant violation of international law, the blockade which was destroying the civilization. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and now I'm quoting it, Hamas was careful to maintain the ceasefire. Hamas was careful to maintain the ceasefire. It is true that what Israel calls rogue terrorist organizations, not Hamas, but other organizations, it's true that some rogue terrorist organizations in Gaza did not honor the ceasefire. But Israel said that Hamas enforced the ceasefire on the rogue terrorist organizations with a great deal, although not complete success. So Hamas was careful to maintain the ceasefire, but Israel reneged on its obligation to lift the blockade. The blockade, which was a flagrant violation of international law. What happened next? The record is very clear. There's no ambiguity or controversy in what happened next. All you have to do is open up Amnesty International's yearbook for 2008. You turn to the entry for Israel in the occupied Palestinian territories, and you'll read this. A ceasefire agreed in June between Israel and Palestinian armed groups in Gaza. It held for 4.5 months, but it broke down after Israeli forces killed 6 Palestinian militants in airstrikes and other attacks on 4 November. Hamas honored the terms of the ceasefire. Israel reneged on its obligations. And then Israel patiently waited. It waited until our election day, November 4th, when the attention of the media and the public was riveted to the result of the historic